All right, buckle up, everyone. Today on The Deep Dive, we're tackling a name that still sends shivers down spines and conjures up images of ruthless power, Machiavelli. Specifically, his enduring and, let's be honest, often misunderstood work, The Prince.
It really is. It's a text whose very title has become shorthand for a certain brand of cunning, hasn't it?
Absolutely.
But what we're doing today is much more than just summarizing what Machiavelli advised. Our deep dive is about truly understanding the why behind his controversial counsel.
Right.
And we're drawing directly from an exceptional introduction to the text itself. It offers, I think, a unique lens into the author's turbulent life and the world that really shaped his thinking.
Exactly. Our mission for this deep dive is to extract the surprising facts, the genuine aha moments, and the enduring insights that make this 500-year-old text surprisingly relevant for understanding power, leadership, and even human nature today. Forget dusty history. This is a manual, a real-world guide forged in the crucible of Renaissance Italy, and it's going to make you see leadership from a totally different angle. So let's unpack this.
Okay. And to truly appreciate how these ideas were forged, you really have to look at the man himself, Niccolò Machiavelli. His life wasn't just the backdrop to his writing. It was the very crucible, as you said, from which the prince emerged.
Yeah.
Born in Florence in 1469 into old Florentine nobility, his life spanned three distinct, wildly different eras of Florence's history.
Right. So he lived through the Golden Age under Lorenzo de' Medici, then the brief period of the Free Republic, and finally the turbulent return of the Medici. Talk about a front-row seat to the constant shifting sands of power. He must have absorbed it all.
He absolutely did. His youth was deeply impressed by the splendor-loving Lorenzo, whose magnificence Machiavelli often referenced. Yet he also saw the dramatic rise and fall of the fervent religious zealot Savonarola, who briefly held immense power in Florence.
Savonarola.
Machiavelli famously cited him as an unarmed prophet who came to a bad end in The Prince. It's a brutal reminder, isn't it, that moral authority alone, without the capacity for force, is often crushed in the realpolitik of power. It's a chillingly pragmatic observation.
A truly Machiavellian jab, you might say, and it tells you so much about his worldview. He also gave us a window into the Florentine youth of his time. He observed them as freer in dress and living, spending time and money in idleness, gaming, and women.
Sounds familiar, maybe.
Well, their main goal, he said, was to appear well-dressed and to speak with wit and acuteness, where he who could wound others the most cleverly was thought the wisest. Quite the society, right? Yet despite the seemingly frivolous environment, he was clearly a serious intellectual. In a letter to his son Guido, he emphasized the critical importance of study, showing his personal commitment to deep intellectual pursuit.
It's clear he was a keen observer and a lifelong learner, just soaking up the realities of his world. And then from 1494 to 1512, Machiavelli served as chancellor and secretary to the Florentine Republic.
Right. This was his practical experience.
Exactly. This period was his school of experience, where he engaged directly with the statesmen and soldiers of his era, witnessing power dynamics firsthand. He wasn't just reading about history, he was making it and watching it unfold all around him.
And he didn't just witness. He drew incredibly concrete lessons from these real-world leaders and, well, maybe more often from their failures.
That's a good point.
Take Katharina Sforza, my Lady Forley. Machiavelli saw her reliance on fortresses fail her. His surprising conclusion: it's far better to earn the confidence of the people than to rely on fortresses.
That is counterintuitive, isn't it?
Yeah, especially for leaders who might think physical defenses are paramount. But he saw that true security lay in the populace's support.
A vital point often overlooked by those in power, even today perhaps. And then there's Louis XII of France. Machiavelli observed this king commit several capital errors in statecraft during his ill-fated Italian ventures.
Oh yeah, the 5 errors.
Right, which ultimately led to him being driven out. These weren't just mistakes, they were textbook examples of violating foundational rules of power, according to Machiavelli.
It seems Louis XII was almost the perfect example of what not to do, the antithesis of a good Machiavellian prince.
Pretty much.
And speaking of models, or perhaps anti-models, Pope Alexander VI and his formidable son, Signore Borgia, Duke Valentino, fill a huge space in The Prince. Borgia is often held up as Machiavelli's ideal usurper, decisive, ruthless, and seemingly unstoppable.
That's true. He definitely admired Borgia's virtue, his ability. But here's a crucial aha moment, I think. Machiavelli also points out Borgia's ultimate Achilles heel.
Which was?
He rose in the fortune of others and falls with them. Despite his immense ability, Borgia ultimately failed due to an extraordinary and unforeseen fatality, his own sickness coinciding with his father's death. It just highlights the precarious nature of borrowed power, even for the most capable. A stark reminder that even the most brilliant plans can be undone by unforeseen circumstances, or what Machiavelli called fortune.
And Borgia's failure to prevent the election of Pope Julius II offers another sharp, almost cynical lesson. Machiavelli saw Borgia cheated into allowing Julius II's election, a cardinal who had every reason to fear Borgia.
Right, a major misstep.
The takeaway: he who thinks new favors will cause great personages to forget old injuries deceives himself. It's a profound warning. In the brutal arena of power, past grievances are a currency that always comes due. What does that tell us about the long game of political memory, even now?
Absolutely. It's a cold, hard look at reality. And on the theme of fortune, Machiavelli famously uses an analogy to women, concluding that it is the bold rather than the cautious man that will win and hold them both.
A very controversial analogy today.
Definitely. But for Machiavelli, fortune wasn't just random luck, but a force that could be wrestled with, even beaten, as he put it. It reveals his belief in proactive, decisive action.
He didn't pull any punches when describing other leaders either. Ferdinand of Aragon, for example, was painted as a man who accomplished great things under the cloak of religion, but who in reality had no mercy, faith, humanity, or integrity. Ouch.
No holds barred, and Emperor Maximilian. Machiavelli revealed him as a secretive man without force of character who failed because he ignored human agencies necessary to carry his schemes into effect.
It's like he was collecting case studies for his political manual, wasn't he? Just observing and noting down what worked and what really didn't.
He certainly was. And then his own world came crashing down. In 1512, the Medici returned to power in Florence. Machiavelli was dismissed, accused of conspiracy, imprisoned, and even tortured.
A truly brutal experience. Must have shaped him profoundly.
Undoubtedly. But it was in this forced exile after being released by Pope Leo X that the prince was born. He famously described his routine: shedding his peasant clothes in the evening, donning noble court dress to enter the ancient courts of the men of old and converse with great men.
What a powerful image of intellectual escape and dedication, just imagining him doing that.
Yeah. And that's where he composed this small work on principalities, as he called it. He details its purpose, discussing what a principality is, what kinds there are, how they can be acquired, how they can be kept, why they are lost.
And it was dedicated to Lorenzo de' Medici, the younger one, right? Though there's no evidence Lorenzo ever actually read it.
That's right, which is kind of ironic. What's fascinating is that while critics have given Machiavelli's name an evil signification, modern research allows for a more reasonable interpretation. The prince deals with eternal problems between the ruled and the rulers, remaining relevant so long as the governments of Europe rely on material rather than on moral forces.
So it's less about being inherently evil and more about describing the raw, uncomfortable mechanics of power as he observed them, maybe devoid of romantic notions.
I think that's a fair way to put it. He was describing the is, not necessarily the ought.
Okay, let's dive into some of those core principles then. Machiavelli begins by categorizing states into hereditary principalities and new ones. He notes that hereditary states are far easier to hold. Right. Essentially, don't transgress customs, deal prudently, and subjects are generally well disposed. Seems simple enough, almost boring compared to the rest.
Well, it sets the stage.
Yeah.
Because the real difficulties, as he observed, arise in a new principality. Men, he says, change their rulers willingly, hoping to better themselves. But they often find they've gone from bad to worse, burdened by new soldiers and hardships.
The grass isn't always greener.
Exactly. The new prince, in the act of seizing power, inevitably makes enemies of those he injures, and often can't satisfy the friends who helped him. You're already in a tricky spot from day one.
So you're stuck between a rock and a hard place right from the start. Machiavelli offers some concrete, often ruthless, strategies for acquisition and retention. If you annex territories that share the same country and language, it's easier.
Yeah, relatively speaking. Destroy the old ruling family, don't change laws or taxes, and the people will likely live quietly, like Brittany joining France, he notes.
But if the annexed territories differ in language, customs, or laws, then it's much harder. Requires good fortune and great energy.
Right. And one of his key tenets for such cases is that the acquiring prince should go and reside there, as the Turk did in Greece, he points out. Being on the spot allows for quick remedies to disorders and fosters a bond of love or fear with subjects.
Makes sense. See things for yourself. Or if residing isn't an option, send colonies.
Yes, colonies.
Yeah.
They are cost-effective, loyal, and only injure a minority of citizens by taking their lands. And those injured, being poor and scattered, as he puts it, are harmless.
Which brings us to one of his most chilling pieces of advice, a real aha moment about the nature of power, I think. Men ought either to be well treated or crushed, because they can avenge themselves of lighter injuries, of more serious ones they cannot. Therefore, the injury that is to be done to a man ought to be of such a kind that one does not stand in fear of revenge. It's incredibly pragmatic, even if it makes you wince.
It does make you wince. It's brutal honesty about perceived necessities. He often cited the Roman strategy as a model of prudence in this vein. They would support minor powers without increasing their strength, keep down greater ones, and prevent foreign powers from gaining authority.
So, managing the balance of power.
Precisely. And crucially, they dealt with problems early, understanding that war is not to be avoided, but is only to be put off to the advantage of others. This directly contrasts with the common, often ruinous sentiment he observed in his own time. Let us enjoy the benefits of the time.
That short-sightedness, he argued it was fatal.
Utterly fatal for a ruler.
And now we can circle back to Louis XII of France and his fatal flaws in Italy. His blunders were a masterclass in what not to do, weren't they?
They really were. Machiavelli identifies several key errors. He destroyed minor powers while simultaneously strengthening his biggest rival, the church he brought in foreign powers like Spain. And crucially, he failed to secure his conquests by actually being there himself or sending reliable colonies.
It was a textbook example of neglecting the foundational rules of power consolidation. Just mistake after mistake.
It truly is. Which leads nicely into another major theme. Machiavelli also dedicates significant attention to the military question, stating that the chief foundations of all states are good laws and good arms.
And he's very clear on the order there.
Yes, he clarifies that good arms lead to good laws and not the other way around. This challenges the notion that morality or justice alone can secure a state. Force comes first, in his view.
This is where it gets really interesting. His absolute condemnation of mercenaries and auxiliaries. Why was he so vehemently opposed to them? What made them, in his eyes, useless and dangerous?
Well, his argument was they were fundamentally unreliable. He described them as disunited, ambitious, undisciplined, unfaithful, cowardly in war, and crucially, only fighting for money.
Not for loyalty or the state.
Exactly. He famously quoted Pope Alexander VI, saying Charles, King of France, was allowed to seize Italy with chalk in hand, meaning it was as easy as marking out billets for his troops because Italy relied on these unreliable forces.
Wow, with chalk in hand. That's quite an image.
Isn't it? He provides historical proof, from the Carthaginians being oppressed by their own mercenaries, to Francesco Sforza turning on his Milanese masters, and the Venetians' decline after adopting mercenary use.
So, real-world examples of betrayal and failure.
Right. Machiavelli observed how mercenary captains used every art to lessen fatigue and danger to themselves and their soldiers, which ultimately, he argued, brought Italy to slavery and contempt. They simply wouldn't risk themselves when it really mattered.
So what's the safe bet then, according to Machiavelli?
Your own forces. Simple as that. A prince is never esteemed more highly than when everyone saw that he was complete master of his own forces.
Self-reliance.
Absolutely. He uses the vivid analogy of David refusing Saul's armor before fighting Goliath. The arms of others either fall from your back, or they weigh you down, or they bind you fast.
That's a powerful metaphor.
It is. His conclusion is stark. No principality is secure without having its own forces. That's a profound aha moment about self-reliance, not just in military terms, but perhaps in any pursuit, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. Relying on others entirely makes you vulnerable. Okay, this brings us to Machiavelli's famous pragmatic approach to a prince's persona, reputation, and action. This is where things get really controversial, I think.
Yes, this is probably the most debated part of The Prince. He argues that a prince must operate in the real truth of the world, not an imagined, idealized one.
The is versus the ought again.
Exactly. How one lives is so far distant from how one ought to live that he who neglects what is done for what ought to be done sooner affects his ruin than his preservation. Therefore, a prince must know how to do wrong and to make use of it or not, according to necessity.
This is where the controversy really heats up, and frankly, it's pretty shocking for modern sensibilities. He presents a paradox. A prince can't possess all good qualities. It's just not possible.
Right. He must be prudent enough to avoid vices that would lose him the state. But sometimes What looks like virtue, if followed, would be his ruin, whilst something else, which looks like vice, yet followed brings him security and prosperity.
That's a tough pill to swallow, isn't it? That being good could actually destroy you.
It forces you to confront the gap between ideal and reality in leadership. Take liberality versus meanness, for example. Generosity sounds great, right?
Of course.
But Machiavelli says it's wiser to have a reputation for meanness which brings reproach without hatred than to be compelled through seeking a reputation for liberality to incur a name for rapacity which begets reproach with hatred.
Because being too generous drains your resources.
Exactly. It quickly drains resources and leads to contempt or hatred through heavy taxation needed to replenish them. He cites Pope Julius II and the King of Spain as mean princes who achieved great things because they husbanded their resources.
Okay, I see the logic, even if it's uncomfortable. And then there's the age-old question. One of the most famous Machiavellian insights.
Yeah.
Better to be loved or feared?
Ah, yes, the classic. Ideally, you'd be both, he admits.
But if you must choose.
It is much safer to be feared than loved. His reasoning, because men are ungrateful, fickle, false, cowardly, covetous. Love is held by a chain of obligation, which, because men are rotten, is easily broken for advantage. But fear preserves you by a dread of punishment which never fails.
Wow. Bleak view of humanity there.
It is. Crucially, though, he adds a vital caveat that's often forgotten in the popular understanding.
Which is?
A prince must inspire fear in such a way that, if he does not win love, he avoids hatred. This is key. Avoid hatred at all costs.
And how do you do that? Avoid hatred while still being feared?
Primarily by abstaining from subjects' property and their women. As he famously states, men more quickly forget the death of their father than the loss of their patrimony.
That's a profound, if dark, observation about human nature and what truly motivates people, or at least what truly angers them.
It certainly is. And this realism extends to keeping faith and dissembling or, lying.
Right. He argues great princes have held good faith of little account. A prince must know how to use both law like a man and force like a beast. You need both natures.
Yes, he must be both a fox to discover snares and a lion to terrify wolves. This is another aha moment. Leaders need to master both the cunning, the strategic deception, and the brute force aspects of power.
So why not just keep your word?
Because, he argues, men are not inherently good and won't keep faith with you. Therefore, a prince cannot and should not keep faith when it's against his interest. He ought to know how to make use of both natures, and that one without the other is not durable.
So you need to be adaptable.
And a good actor. It's necessary to know well how to disguise this characteristic and to be a great pretender and dissembler. Alexander VI is cited as a master deceiver, someone who never did what he said, yet always succeeded in his deceptions because he understood human credulity.
The ultimate pragmatist. He takes it further, saying it is unnecessary for a prince to have all the good qualities I've enumerated, but it is very necessary to appear to have them.
Appearance is reality in politics.
Appear merciful, faithful, humane, religious, and upright, but be ready to act contrary to fidelity, friendship, humanity, and religion if the state demands it. Because, as he notes, men judge more by the eye than by the hand.
Perception is paramount. It makes you wonder how much of modern leadership is about crafting that perception, doesn't it?
Absolutely. He also stresses the importance of avoiding hatred and contempt, coming back to that point. Rapaciousness and violating subjects' property or women lead to hatred. Fickleness, frivolity, effeminacy, and irresolution lead to contempt.
Two different dangers. A prince should instead display greatness, courage, gravity, and fortitude in his actions. He argues the best defense against internal conspiracies is simply not to be hated and despised by the people.
Because if the people like you, conspirators have nowhere to turn.
Exactly. When the people esteem the prince, conspiracies are of little account. He points to the French government structure, with its parliament acting as an arbiter between nobles and the people, as a good example of balancing power to avoid hatred for the king himself. Let someone else handle the unpopular stuff.
Smart delegation. He used the Roman emperors as cautionary tales here too, right?
Yes, they had a unique problem. They had to satisfy both their soldiers, who often liked cruel and rapacious princes because it meant more spoils for them, and the people, who generally wanted peace, a difficult balancing act.
And getting it wrong was fatal.
Utterly. Hatred or contempt proved fatal. Severus, a new prince, was his example of success here. He knew how to balance the fox and the lion, keeping his soldiers friendly through strength and cunning, even while oppressing the people to some extent. Emperors like Antoninus and Commodus, who neglected aspects of this balance, ultimately failed.
Okay, so we've unpacked Machiavelli's chillingly pragmatic principles. But he wasn't just theorizing in a vacuum, was he? He saw these ideas play out in the lives of real leaders.
Absolutely. And perhaps no one exemplifies his core tenets more vividly than Castruccio Castracani of Lucca, a fascinating figure born in 1284 who rose from complete obscurity to become a powerful prince.
Right, the foundling. How does Castruccio's rise and ruthless consolidation of power echo Machiavelli's advice on acquiring and holding a new principality? He came from literally nothing, found in a vineyard, raised by a priest.
Exactly. Castruccio's story is almost a living illustration of the prince. He showed an early inclination for arms and leadership, quickly excelling. He seized power through calculated alliances and, frankly, ruthless action. Well, helping Uguccione of Faggiola to enter Lucca and eliminate a rival, Giorgio degli Uffizi. But then later, he was instrumental in turning the Lucchese against Uguccione himself when it suited him.
Okay, playing both sides. Very foxy.
Very. His strategic brilliance was also clear at the Battle of Montecatini, where he deliberately placed his strongest troops on the flanks, contrary to his enemy's strategy, securing a decisive victory against a larger Florentine force.
So he clearly understood the power of his own forces and smart tactics, just like Machiavelli advised. And his consolidation of power, was it equally Machiavellian?
Oh, absolutely, equally brutal and effective. After being imprisoned by Uguccione, he was released by the people, then rose to become Prince of Lucca. To hold it, he ruthlessly eliminated ambitious rivals, not sparing one of them, Machiavelli writes. And he built a fortress with the stones of their demolished towers. Talk about symbolism.
Wow, literally building his power on the ruins of his rivals.
Precisely. When he took the city of Pistoia, he exploited existing factions, promising aid to both the Bianchi and Neri parties, then had their leaders killed upon entry. A masterclass in using fraud, a classic fox move combined with the lion's force. He truly embodies the idea of needing both natures.
His military genius was put to the ultimate test at the Battle of Serravalle, wasn't it?
Yes, outnumbered significantly, something like 12,000 against 30,000 Florentines. Castruccio's mastery of terrain and flanking maneuvers led to a massive, decisive victory.
Incredible. But his abrupt end after his greatest victory, the Battle of Fucecchio, serves as another crucial lesson, doesn't it? The role of fortune again.
Indeed. It's almost tragic. Castruccio died shortly after that huge triumph, just from catching a chill standing in the damp evening air after the battle. Machiavelli notes, rather poetically, "Fortune, growing envious of the glory of Castruccio, took away his life just at the time when she should have preserved it."
So even this most capable of princes, the embodiment of virtue, couldn't escape the fickle hand of fortune in the end.
Exactly. And his dying words to his successor, Pagolo, were stark. He acknowledged he left a vast estate, but unsettled and insecure. He urged Pagolo to make peace and govern by the arts of peace if he lacked Castruccio's own genius for fighting.
A realistic self-assessment even at the end. And the outcome underscores Machiavelli's point about a prince's own strength and ability, right?
Perfectly. Pagolo had not the abilities, as Machiavelli dryly puts it, and soon lost much of what Castruccio had gained through decades of struggle. It highlights that leadership qualities aren't easily transferred.
So Machiavelli's assessment of Castruccio was?
He saw him as a man of exceptional abilities, willing to use fraud because it was the victory that brought the glory, not the methods, bold, prudent, and witty. He famously quotes Castruccio saying, "Men ought to attempt everything and fear nothing, that God is a lover of strong men because one always sees that the weak are chastised by the strong."
A harsh but direct summary of that worldview. A very Machiavellian figure indeed.
So bringing it back to Machiavelli's main arguments, why did Italian princes fail, according to him? He reiterates they lost their states due to reliance on poor arms, those mercenaries we talked about, and their failure to manage their people or nobles effectively. They didn't secure their base.
And they blamed bad luck.
Right. They blamed fortune, he said, but really suffered from their own sloth and lack of foresight. They simply didn't prepare for the inevitable storms during calm times. They didn't anticipate.
This leads to his famous statement on human agency versus destiny, which I find quite interesting. He says, "Fortune is the arbiter of one half of our actions, but she still leaves us to direct the other half." That's actually quite empowering, isn't it? It's not all predetermined.
It is. It suggests we have significant control. Success, he believed, comes from aligning actions with the spirit of the times, being adaptable. And that analogy of fortune as a woman, which we mentioned earlier, concludes, if you wish to keep her under, it is necessary to beat and ill-use her, as she allows herself to be mastered by the adventurous.
Again, a very strong, perhaps problematic image today, but a powerful call to seize opportunity and be proactive, not passive.
Absolutely. And he ends The Prince, on that note, really,
Right.
with a passionate call for a new Italian prince to rise and liberate Italy from the barbarians. He emphasizes that the desperate times actually offer the perfect opportunity to establish new orders with Italian valor and, crucially, own forces.
Back to self-reliance.
Always. He believed God is not willing to do everything and thus take away our free will and that share of glory which belongs to us. It's an almost religious plea for human agency in shaping destiny, even amidst chaos.
So to recap, The Prince isn't just about being Machiavellian in the modern negative sense. It's a raw, pragmatic, and often uncomfortable look at how power is acquired, maintained, and lost in a dangerous world, based on Machiavelli's keen, real-world observations and experiences.
Exactly. It makes you consider how these ancient principles, from the necessity of self-reliance and defense, to the delicate balance of fear and respect, and even the calculated use of appearances, still resonate in leadership and organizational dynamics today, whether you're talking government or business or, frankly, any situation involving power.
Yeah, these aren't just historical footnotes. They feel like blueprints, almost, still applicable.
They force you to think about the hard reality.
And here's something to mull over as we wrap up. If Machiavelli famously said that prudence consists in choosing the least dangerous ones among available options, how much of our modern world stability relies on leaders, or even ourselves in our own spheres, making these calculated, often difficult choices between lesser evils?
That's a great question.
And what does it truly mean to be well-informed about the forces that shape our world then and now? Are we seeing the real truth or just the appearances?
Something to ponder on your drive home, perhaps, or wherever you're listening.
Indeed. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into a book that has fascinated and terrified people for 500 years, Machiavelli's The Prince. It is an absolute masterclass in how to get and keep power, and we're about to find out exactly why.
So, when you hear that word Machiavellian, what comes to mind? For most of us, it's, deceit, backstabbing, a complete lack of a moral compass. But is that really fair? Was Machiavelli just a guy who taught people how to be evil? Or is there a lot more to the story? Let's try to separate the man from the myth and figure out what this book is really all about.
All right, first things first. To really get what's in this book, we have to push past the legend that's built up around it. For centuries, Machiavellian has basically just been another word for evil. But you have to remember, that reputation was mostly cooked up by his enemies. So let's look at where his advice actually came from.
So, who was this guy, Niccolò Machiavelli? Well, he wasn't a king, he wasn't a general, he was a civil servant, a diplomat working for the city-state of Florence. And he was trying to do his job in the middle of 16th century Italy, which was, to put it mildly, an absolute chaotic mess of popes, kings, and constantly warring city-states. For about 14 years, Machiavelli was a pretty important guy, a respected diplomat who was right in the thick of European politics. And then, bam. In 1512, his whole world just imploded. The powerful Medici family came back to power in Florence. The republic he worked for was totally crushed. And suddenly, Machiavelli was out of a job, accused of being a traitor, thrown in prison, and even tortured. His career was completely over.
And this is the moment The Prince is born. It wasn't written from a place of power. It was written while he was broke and in forced exile. Machiavelli basically poured every single thing he'd learned from watching powerful and often ruthless leaders into this small work. And here's the absolute key to understanding it. The Prince was basically the most audacious, high-stakes job application in history. And he wrote it for the very people who had just ruined his life, all in a desperate Hail Mary pass to get back in the game.
So, what is this book, really? It's not a work of philosophy. Machiavelli himself said it was supposed to be a practical guide. Think of it as a survival manual for any ruler, telling them exactly how to get power, how to hold on to it, and how to build a state that doesn't just fall apart.
And this right here is probably his most radical, most shocking idea. See, at the time, books about politics were all about describing these imaginary perfect worlds. But Machiavelli said, no, a leader has to deal with the world as it is, not as we wish it would be. He basically says that a ruler who tries to be good all the time is going to get crushed by people who aren't. In his view, the only thing that matters is brutal realism. That's how you survive. Okay, so if a leader has to be a realist, what's a better tool for staying in power? Getting people to love you or getting them to fear you? This is one of the most famous questions from the book. And, well, Machiavelli's answer doesn't pull any punches. Now, Machiavelli says, sure, it would be great to be both loved and feared, but that's pretty rare. So if you have to choose just one, he says you have to choose fear. Why? Because love is unreliable. People, he says, are fickle and self-interested, and they'll break that bond of love the second it's convenient for them. But fear, the dread of punishment, well, as he puts it, that never fails.
But there is a really crucial line you can't cross. A prince has to be feared, yes, but he must never be hated. And the absolute fastest way to get your people to hate you is to take their property. This quote here is, well, it's pretty chilling. It reveals his incredibly cynical view of human nature, that people will get over the death of a family member faster than they'll get over losing their property. A feared ruler is respected. A hated one is just asking for a rebellion.
To see this in action, Machiavelli gives us the perfect example, Cesare Borgia, a man he saw up close and basically saw as a master of using power. So, Borgia had to calm down a rebellious province. What does he do? First, he sends in a super cruel governor, a guy named Ramiro Dorco, to just brutally crush everyone. Once the place is under control and Dorco is hated by everyone, Borgia has him publicly arrested, cut in half, and left in the town square. It was a masterstroke. He gets the credit for restoring order, but he also gets to wash his hands of the cruelty. The people, as Machiavelli writes, were left both satisfied and dismayed. Just brilliant calculated politics. Now, a strategy like that, it's not just about brute force. It takes real cunning. And that brings us to another one of Machiavelli's big metaphors. If a ruler has to act like a beast sometimes, what kind of beast should he be? So Machiavelli says there are two basic ways to fight, with laws, which is the way of humans, and with force, which is the way of beasts. And since laws alone are often not enough to get the job done, a smart leader has to know how to use both. It's not an either-or choice. You have to master the man and the beast. And he's very specific. A ruler needs to be two beasts at once, the lion and the fox. You need the lion's raw strength to scare away the wolves, but the lion on its own isn't that smart. It's defenseless against traps. That's where the fox comes in. The fox is clever enough to see the snares, but it's too weak to fight off the wolves. So a leader has to be both. You need strength, but you also need the cunning to know when and how to use it. And this is where that fox-like cunning gets really controversial. Machiavelli's logic here is just brutal. He says, since other men are fundamentally untrustworthy and will break their promises to you, you are under no obligation to keep your promises to them. A prince, he says, has to appear to be a good person, seem faithful, merciful, religious, but underneath he has to be ready to be the complete opposite at a moment's notice if that's what it takes to save the state. So, why? Why all this incredibly dark advice? Was Machiavelli just, a teacher of evil? Or was there some kind of higher purpose to all this brutal realism? Well, in the very last chapter of The Prince, he finally lays his cards on the table. When you strip it all away, Machiavelli was a patriot. He looked at his home, Italy, and he saw a country that was, in his words, beaten, despoiled, torn, overrun. He saw a nation totally humiliated by foreign invaders. He truly believed that the ruthless, terrible methods he described were a necessary evil. They were the only tools he thought were strong enough for a new leader to finally unite Italy and kick the foreigners out. In his mind, the cruelty and the lies weren't for a ruler's personal gain. They were for the survival of the nation itself. But can one leader really change the fate of a whole country? Machiavelli tackles this head-on, this idea of luck, which he called fortuna. He believed that fortune, or chance, controls about half of our lives. But, and this is a huge but, it leaves the other half for us to control. He compares fortune to a raging river. You can't stop it from flooding, but you can build dams and channels to direct its power. And that is what he called virtu. It's not virtue in a moral sense. It's skill, audacity, bold action. It's how a great leader tames luck itself. And so we're right back where we started.
Was Machiavelli a teacher of evil, the man who wrote the handbook for every tyrant who followed? Or was he a political realist, maybe the very first person to look at power with cold, hard honesty, describing not how people should be, but how they actually are? He doesn't really give us any easy answers, just a tough, uncomfortable look at the true price of power. After 500 years, we're still arguing about it. So now that you have the whole story, what do you think?